Hello everyone, Alex here from WarrenOffKeys.com, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can create a fast type game. So for example, if I go into Discord and I run !fast type, it'll then say preparing game and it's going to count down within 5 seconds. Then after that, it is going to give us a random word. Whoever types it in first is going to get a point. And then after that, it'll generate another random word, and then it'll just keep generating random words. And then after 10 seconds, which is how I have it configured at the moment, it is going to say who won. So currently I have my two bots having random number of points just for demonstration purposes, but then I had 3 words right, so I had 3 points. And so this is the simple game we're going to be creating within this video. So this video is actually a request from the patron The Beats, so I want to thank them for their support, and if anyone wants prioritized video requests among a lot of other perks, then consider checking out the Patreon link in the video description. Also, real quick before we get started, if you do need help with anything, feel free to leave a comment down below or ask in the Warren Off Keys Discord, and I'm sure we'll be able to help you there. And so with that said, let's get started. Here I have this project for a Discord bot I've been working on throughout this series. If you do want access to this, a link to the GitHub repository can be found in the video description. This does use the Commando framework, and a link on how to set up the Commando framework will be in the video description as well. I have a very simple tutorial on that. So within my commands directory for Commando, I'm going to make a new folder. This one will be called games. And within here, I'm going to make a new file. This will be called fast-type.js. So within here, we have to set up our Commando command. So I'm going to first import Commando, so const commando. This is going to require discord.js-commando. And then we need to export a class. So module.export. This is going to be a class called fast-type-game. And this class is going to extend another class, so extends commando.command. This way that our class is going to have all of the existing functionality of the command class, which is necessary for this case. Now we're going to need a constructor. This is going to be ran whenever this instance of this class is created. So we're going to have a client object, which is going to be the actual bot. And then we need to call the constructor for our command class, which we're extending. And to do that, you have to call super. We then have 2 arguments to pass in. We see on the tooltip here, we have the client and then info. So I can pass in the client, and then I'm going to pass in an object. So this is how we're going to actually set up our command. So the name will be fast type. The group will be games. And real quick, we do have to set up this group. So going into our main file and scrolling down, we see all these different groups. So I'm going to make another array here with the first element be called games, and the second element will be called commands to handle games. If you did watch my video on how to set up Cognito, then you should have something like this already. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to close this file. I'm then going to have member name, which will be the same thing as name, so fast type. I'll then have a description. This one will be starts a fast type game. And then we're going to have our user permissions, and this will be in a list of permissions that whoever is running the command must have. So these are going to be strings. In my case, I'm just going to use administrator, but you can use whatever permissions you want. Now we need an asynchronous run function. This is going to be actually invoked whenever our command is ran. And just to ensure that this is working so far, I can console log ran. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to start my bot with node index.js. We then see the client is ready. Going into Discord, I can run !fast type, and it'll then say ran in the console. That is working so far. So we're now going to create some objects above our exported class here. And the first thing we want is a games object. So constant games equals an empty object. And I'm going to create an example variable here that's going to show you what a game object will look like. So I'll say example. And then here we're going to have our channel ID as our key, and that's going to hold another value. So every single individual channel ID will have different values or different games. Now, of course, these won't just be the text channel ID. These will be the actual channel IDs, whatever that might be. But for now, I'm just going to type out what this should be as a name, just like that. Now this object here, we're going to have a few different properties. The first one will be message. And this will be the actual message object. That way we can go through and easily edit the message instead of sending new messages. We then want a stage. And this is going to be either starting, in-game, or ending. And I'll explain that better in a few moments. So for now, this will just be a simple string. Next, we want a counter, which will be a number. And this will be the actual number that is decreased. And we'll check to see if this counter reaches 0. And if it does, we'll do something else depending on what stage it's in. Then we need the current word, which will be a string. Of course, this is just the current word that the people should try and guess. We then need remaining words, which will be an array of strings. I'll just say words here. We're actually going to create a JSON document that is going to hold all of our possible words here in a few moments. And then we're going to have a points object, which is going to have the user ID and then the points. And so this is what a game will look like. And so we're going to have our games object here. This will essentially have this document here inside of our games object, but for every game that's actually running. And then whenever a game's done, we're going to delete this object from this object right here. So now I'm going to create another object that will be called stages. So const stages. An empty object for now. Like I mentioned when I wrote line 6, stage is going to be either starting, end game, or ending. And so we're going to have 3 different properties inside of our stages variable that are going to be similar to those. So we can have starting, and this is going to be a function. And then we're going to have in_game, which will also be a function. And then we're going to have ending, which will also be a function. These functions are going to be used to actually send a message depending on the information that we provide to it. So for example, this first one, starting is going to be a counter. And then here we're going to return a template literal that will say a new quote fast type game is starting in counter s. So if we pass in 10, it would say a new fast type game is starting in 10s, which means 10 seconds. And so now we can call this function whenever we want to actually display a message for the starting stage. So I'll come back and actually write the functions for end game and ending later on once we reach those points. But for now, we're going to focus on just the starting stage. So below stages, I'm now going to create a new function. This will be called game loop. And this is just going to be an empty function. And then we actually want to call that within our constructor. So below super, we want to call game loop. Now game loop is going to be a recursive function in a way. We are going to use the set timeout function to continue to call game loop every single second. So I could say set timeout. The first argument is going to be the actual function to call. In this case, it is game loop. The second argument is how long it takes to call that. In this case, we're going to say 1000, which is the exact number of milliseconds required for 1 single second. So this is essentially saying recall this game loop function once every second. So now within here, above our set timeout, we actually want to loop through every single game. So I can say for const key in games. And a for in loop is going to allow us to loop through all of the keys of an object. And then we want to gain access to the actual game. So I can say const game equals games index of key. Then we have access to the current game that we're looping through. And we want to gain access to a few more properties of that game object. So I could say const message and stage. We're going to destructure these properties from the actual game object. Next, we want to do some functionality depending on the stage. So I can say if stage is exactly equal to starting. So within here, we're going to be able to edit the certain message that we destructured right here, depending on if it's starting or not. And like I mentioned earlier, here we have this function that is going to be the exact message that you saw when the game was starting in the demo. So with that said, we can simply say message.edit. And now we want to gain access to this function. So this is going to be using the starting key right here, which we know is the exact value of stage. So we can access stages, which is this object right here. And then we need to access the starting stage, which just happens to be the exact value inside of our stage object, which we know that that's the case because this if statement would not be true otherwise. And this is going to return this function. So now we need to actually invoke this function. And so I can use parentheses and I can pass in the counter. So I can pass in game.counter. And so now this is actually going to run this function once every second because of the timeout. We'll continuously call the game loop function. So everything in here will be called once per second. And so as long as the stage is starting, it is going to edit the message. So now after this if statement, I want to say minus minus game.counter. And so this will decrease counter by 1. So this run function actually has a message argument. And I want to first gain access to the channel property. So I'll destructure that. Const channel equals message. So I have access to the channel that the message was sent in. And then I want to delete this message. So message.delete. Then afterwards, I can say channel.send preparing game ... And this is going to return a promise. So I can use .then. And we're now going to get a message object. This will be a different message object than what we had before. This is the actual command, whereas the .then message is going to be the message that was just sent that says preparing game. Now inside of here, we want to actually create a game. So we can say games index of channel.id equals an object. And now we're going to provide some very basic information based off of the game object that we've seen before. So scrolling back down, the first thing we want is our message. Then we want our stage, which will be starting. And then we want our counter. This is how long it'll take for the game to start. You could set this to 60 seconds, so you could set 30, whatever you want. For demonstration, I'm just going to use 5 because it's quick. We then want remaining words, which will be an array that I'll provide here in a moment. And then we also want points. This is going to be an object. Now, in my exact use case, I'm going to paste in 2 values of bots. You can do this if you want. This is the Worn Off Keys bot ID, and then this is the tutorial bot ID. So if you have different users or bots that you want to provide some dummy data for, go ahead and use it. I'm only doing this because I'm the only person who has access to this channel. So if you have friends to test with, then go ahead and just have them test with you. Normally, you would have this be an empty object. So once you're done writing the code and you know it works, you want to go ahead and delete these. So this is just an empty object. So before we continue, I actually want to create a new JSON file. So within my utility folder, I'm going to make a new file. This one will be called fast-type-words.json. And within here, there's going to be an object, and the key will be words, and the value will be an array. Now I'm going to paste in certain words that I got from an online word generator. You can use whatever word you want, and obviously the more words you have, the better. Now we can go ahead and save and close this file. And we need to go to the top of our file, and we need to actually import that. So I can say const words equals require @util/fast-type-words. Now, if you don't have the module aliases package installed, then you will have to use a relative path using .. and then actually finding the direct path where your file is located, wherever that might be. But I do have a video on how to set up module aliases, and so it makes it much easier where I can just specify the util folder and then access the file that way. So a link to that video on how to set this up will be in the video description. But now that we have access to the words, this is actually the entire JSON object. So it's this entire thing. We only want access to the words property. So I could say .words, but of course we're using ES6 here, and so we can actually destructure this by just wrapping this inside of curly braces, and that'll be the same thing as using .words. Now we have access to the words array within this right here. So scrolling down, the remaining words, we want to use the spread operator, which is 3 dots, and then the array. This is going to essentially clone the array into a new array. And this is useful because we're going to be removing words from the remaining words array here. And so we want to make sure that we don't remove things from the original array because we always want that to remain the same. So we're going to essentially clone that array. So we're making edits to the clone and not the original. All right, so let's go ahead and test this. I'm going to save my file, and I'm going to restart my bot with node index.js. Okay, it says the client is ready. Going back into my tutorial channel, I can run !fast type, and it'll say preparing game. And we actually get an exception here. So I see that I have made a mistake. Scrolling up to our game loop, we have to actually put this ending parenthesis outside because edit is going to require its own string. And so we want const string equals this. So stages is an object, as you see right here, with different keys and values, the value being functions. And so stages, the index of stage is going to return a function. We then want to call that function. So I can just pass in string. I'm going to leave the code like this. It seems easier to read. So I can save this and I can run the bot again. Then it says the client is ready. So I can now run !fast type. And it says preparing game. A new fast time game is starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and then -1. So it's going to keep going because we didn't tell it to stop. But this is now working. It's now running our game loop once every second, and it's decreasing the number once every second. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my bot and delete these messages. Now within this if stage is exactly equal to starting if statements, we want to see if game.counter is less than or equal to 0. So I can say if game.counter is less than or equal to 0, this means that we should move to the next stage. And so I can say game.stage now equals in game. I can then say game.counter equals 15. And so this is going to be how long the game actually lasts for. You can change this to whatever you want. And now we want to actually select a word. And we're going to be doing this a couple times, so I'm going to make this into its own function. So scrolling up, I can say const select word. This function will have one argument, which is game. And then within here, we're going to say game.currentWord equals game.remaining_words index of math.floor, which will then take math.random times game.remaining_words.length. And so this is the syntax to actually get a random element from an array. And so we're going to say the current word equals a random element from remaining words. Now we need to gain access to the index of that remaining word. That way we can remove it from the remaining words array. So constant index equals game.remaining_words.index of, and then we'll pass in game.currentWord, which is the word that was selected. Now we can use the splice function, which is a function on the array class that will allow us to remove a certain element from an array. So game.remaining_words.splice. We can then pass an index, which is where it starts, and then we want the number of items to delete. You see this on the tooltip right here. Start is a number, and then delete count is how many we want to delete. We can just pass in 1. Okay, so now we can scroll down, and right here, after we set the game counter, we want to call select word passing in the current game. Now I want to edit the message, so we're going to do something similar to this. I'm actually going to reuse the string variable, so I have to change this from a constant to a variable using let. Now the string variable can be changed. I could then say string equals stages, index of game.stage, which now equals endgame. And then we can call game.currentWord. Now this isn't a function that is written yet because this is an empty function here. We're going to write that here in a second. But going back, we can then say message.edit string. Now we can go up and we can edit this endgame function here. As you saw, it required a word, so that variable here would be word. And then this is going to return a certain string that'll say the word is whatever it is. And if you notice from the demo, there were spaces in between each letter. The reason for that is it makes it very difficult for people to actually copy and paste it. Without the spaces, people can just double click on the word, Control C and then Control V and get it almost immediately. And so adding the spaces makes it very difficult to do that. So we're going to create a new variable using let. This will be called spaced word, and this will be an empty string for now. We then want to actually loop through every single character of the word string. So to do that, we can say for constant character of, and then we're going to create a new array of the string. So this is the easiest way to actually convert a string into a character array. We just use the spread operator, so ... word, and then we can add in our curly braces. So for example, with the spread operator in this case, if we were to have a string like hello, we would then have an array like this. And so now this makes it much easier for us to actually loop through every individual character. So now within this for loop, we can say spaced word is plus equal to character, and then also spaced word is plus equal to a space. Now after the for loop, we want to actually return a message using a template literal. We can say the new word is, and then we're going to put this in bold, and we'll say spaced word, and then we're going to end the bold, and then we're going to put an exclamation point. Now we can save this, and we can try running our bot with node index.js. Going back into Discord, I can then run exclamation point fast type. So let's say preparing game. Your new fast type game is starting in 3, 2, 1. And then it says the new word is enchanting, and it has spaces in between. So everything seems to be working so far. I'll go ahead and stop the bot. Next, we need to listen for messages that are sent. So within our constructor here, I'm going to say client.onMessage. We'll get access to a message object from this. So whenever a message is sent, we will then have this callback ran here. Now the first thing we want to do is gain access to a few different properties of the message. So we can destructure those. So constant channel, content, and member. This is going to equal message. And then I'm going to say constant ID equals channel. Now we have access to the channel that the message was sent in, the actual content, which is the text, and the member who sent it. And we also have access to the ID of the channel. Now we want to get access to the actual game. So const game equals games, which is our object that we defined way up here on line 17. index of ID. So if there is no game currently in this channel, this is going to be a falsy value. It'll be undefined. And so I can say if game, then in this if statement, we know that a game exists. However, we want to make sure that this is actually the right time to check for new messages. So we can say if game and game.currentWord and not member.user.bot. So this right here is going to make sure that a current word is actually existing and that we're waiting for people to actually try and guess it. And then this right here is going to ensure that the person who sent the message is not a bot. So the first thing we want to do is actually delete this message. So message.delete. Then we want to see if the game is actually in-game. So if game.stage is exactly equal to in-game. And we also want to make sure that whoever guessed this guessed the correct word. So this is going to be case insensitive, which means that capitals don't matter. And so to do that correctly, we could just convert the user's input to the correct word as both lowercase. We could say and content, which is the actual message that the user sent, dot to lowercase, which is a function. If this is exactly equal to game.currentWord dot to lowercase, which is also a function. Now at this point, they have guessed the word correctly. Now we want to say game.currentWord equals null, which will make sure that future guesses don't actually happen because this will be false right here. And now I want to say const seconds equals 2, which is how long we're going to wait for generating the next word. Now I want to gain access to the points for the game. So const points equals game. So we've just structured the points property from the game object. And then we want to gain access to the amount of points that this user actually has. So we can say points index of member, which is the object that we just structured from whoever sent the message. So member.id. This is going to equal points index of member.id or 0. So if this is a falsy value, such as undefined or null, it's then going to default to 0. And so this is one way of basically setting a default value if there is no value already in the variable. This syntax is the same exact thing as this. If I would say if not points index of member.id, I can then say points index of member.id equals 0. So this line right here is the exact same thing as this entire if statement. So you can use whichever one you prefer. I'm going to use this one because it seems cleaner. We can now reply to the user saying that they won. So message.reply, you won. This is actually going to be a template literal. So you won plus 1 point. And then within parentheses here, I'm going to display how many points they currently have. So I'm going to say plus points index of member.id. The plus is going to increase the actual variable right here, but plus before the actual variable name means it's going to increase it and then use it. Plus afterwards means it's going to use it and then increase it. So in this case, if it's 0, it'll then have the message say plus 1 point, 1 point total. But if it was existing, like let's say we had 3, it would then say plus 1 point, 4 points total, because it's going to increase it by 1 and then use the variable. So now we can then say the word total, which will be before the ending parenthesis. And this is actually going to give us a callback. So we can use .then, and we gain access to the new message. Now within here, I could say new message.delete. And this will actually delete the message, but we want to wait a certain number of seconds. The delete function actually has an object here. We can pass in a timeout, which will be 1000 times seconds. This is going to be in milliseconds, and so 1000 milliseconds equals a second. And so this is the equation to actually generate how many seconds you want based off this variable right here. So all in all, this is going to delete the message 2 seconds later. Next up, we're going to create our own timeout. So set timeout, and we're going to also have this run 2 seconds later. So 1000 times seconds. Now this function here is going to be responsible for actually generating a new word. So at this point, we want to make sure that our game is still in game. So if game.stage is exactly equal to in game, then we can say select word, passing in our game. And then we can say game.message.edit. This is going to be a string that we actually should generate like we have been. So const string equals stages, index of game.stage, which will then call a function, which will pass in game.currentWord. And so we can pass in string. And so now 2 seconds later, because of this seconds variable here, it'll now generate a new word if this game is still running. So we can go ahead and save this, and we can run our bot with node index.js. Going back into Discord, I can run an ! fast type. It'll say preparing game. So it'll then say the new word is enchanting. I type that. It'll then say U1 plus 1 point. If I typed anything else, it'll just completely ignore it. The new word is now bat, as you saw it changed. So if I type that, it says I won. I have 2 points total now. And then bridge. So I got 3 points, and so this seems to be working. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my bot and delete this message. So now scrolling up into our game loop function, we now need to see if the game is in the game. So on line 49, we see if stage is exactly equal to starting. After that, we're going to say else if stage is exactly equal to end game. And then within here, we want to make sure that our counter is greater than 0. If it is less than or equal to 0, we are then going to start ending the game. So if game.counter is less than or equal to 0, we then want to go ahead and end the game. So game.stage equals ending. I could then say constant string equals stages, index of game.stage. This is going to be a function. So this is a function that I'll write first before actually using it. Scrolling up, we have this empty function here. This object will actually be points. Now within this function, we are going to actually format all of the points and display who had the most. So we need to first sort those points. So we can say const sorted. This is going to be somewhat complicated if you haven't sorted things before, but I'll try and explain it the best I can. So in here, we can say object.keys, which will be returning an array of all of the keys. So in this case, let's say that we had the stages object, for example, it would return an array with starting, endgame, and ending. Only the keys within the object. Either pass in the object, which will be points. Now, as we know from our example here, all of the keys will be the different user IDs that actually participated in this game. Then we have a list of user IDs. Now, again, this is an array, and arrays have a .sort function, which have a callback function here, and we can pass in A and B. These will be two different values that we're looping through that we'll then compare. And now we want to actually return if points index of B is less than points index of A. And so this is actually going to create an array and then sort them based off of whoever has the most points. So I'm going to create a variable with let results. This is going to be an empty string, and then I'm going to loop through all of the sorted points. So for const key of sorted. So now we want to get the amount of points. So constant amount equals points index of key. And then I can say results is plus equal to a template literal. We would then want to tag the user, and the syntax for that is less than sign, at than, and then the ID, which just happens to be the key here, and then a greater than sign. So we'll say that person had however many points. Now, I don't want to include an S if it's only 1 point. So directly after point, without a space, I'm going to add in amount is exactly equal to 1. We're using a ternary operator here. So if it's 1, there's going to be nothing. Otherwise, we're going to say S. Now afterwards, we're going to add a /n. That'll make a new line, so all the results are on different lines. And then we can return a template literal. This one will say the game is now over. Here's how everyone did. And then we're going to add 2 new lines. And we're going to actually insert in results. And then I'm going to add in a bunch of dashes to make it easy to understand where the end of the game is. We don't have to add in a new line here because the end of our results will contain a new line naturally because of this character right here. So now scrolling down, we can go into our game loop. Here it is right here. So here we actually create a string. We have to pass in game.points. And so this is going to be the function that we just created. And so now we have an actual result string that is going to be the message that we just formatted. So we can say message.edit string. And then we want to actually delete the game. So we can say delete game's index of key. And then we want to make sure that we actually continue from this. That way that we just go to the next game. We don't care about any other future processing you might add here. So we can save this, and we can run our bot. Going into Discord, I can run fast type. So the word is volleyball. So I have 1 point. Then I say the new word is live. This is E1, 2 points, and then car. I got 3 points. And then it says that the game is now over. Here's what everyone did. The one-off keys bot got 4 points. I got 3 points, and the tutorial bot got 1 point. Now again, the reason for these being in here is because I'm hard coding in these values. You only want to do this for testing. You want this to be an empty object without these values in it by default whenever you're actually using this with real people. And so this is how you're going to create a very basic fast type game using Discord.js. Thanks for watching this Discord.js tutorial. If you want to learn more about Discord.js, consider clicking on the playlist you see on your screen now. If you need help, feel free to leave a comment or ask in the Worn Off Keys Discord, which can be found in the video description.